As we are on the downhill slide with the last of the GRIs and U.S. rules, I thought some downhill action would be appropriate. GRI 6 is the last of the GRIs. It prescribes that for legal purposes 1 to 5 govern mutatis mutandis, or with necessary changes, classification at the subheading levels within the same heading. Have you noticed that the previous rules 1 through 5 referred only to the headings? GRI 6 expands the general rules to apply also to subheadings. There are countries that use a version of the Harmonized Tariff Book without subheadings. For this reason, subheadings are not mentioned in the first 5 rules. Any country that has a Harmonized Tariff Book without subheadings does not need GRI 6. However, lucky you, the United States uses subheadings, so you need a Rule 6. It tells us that 1 to 5 are to be reapplied to determine the classification of goods at the subheading level. For example, General Rule 3 reads, when goods are prima facie classifiable under 2 or more headings, to apply this rule, mutatis mutandis, to the subheadings, change it to read, when goods are prima facie classifiable under 2 or more subheadings. Goods are to be compared at equal subheading levels, that is, at the same indent level, under the heading or subheading that most specifically describes or identifies them, or is otherwise required or directed under Rule 1 to 5. Only subheadings at the same level within the same heading are comparable. No consideration should be given to the terms of any subheading within another heading when considering the proper classification of merchandise. Remember our anorak from the first session. What makes this difficult is that not all descriptions are opposite tariff numbers. Sometimes you have to measure their distance from the left margin for comparison purposes. If the 2 provisions you are comparing are equal in distance, they are at the same level. When classifying, always start at the outermost left margin and proceed inward. Let's illustrate this by classifying a reversible quilt. The outer shell of one side is half cotton and half polyester. The other side is 80% silk and 20% linen. The first thing to do is find a 4-digit heading that will cover our quilt. Using GRI 1, we find that the quilt falls under the 4-digit heading 9404, mattress supports, articles of bedding, or similar furnishings. For example, mattresses, quilts, eiderdowns, cushions, and pillows. Now we start looking at the 6-digit subheadings under 9404 using rules 1 to 5 pursuant to 6. Scanning down the page, we find 4 choices that are equally distant from the left margin: mattress supports, mattresses, sleeping bags, and other. As our quilt does not fall into the first 3, we look at the other. So our 6-digit heading under other is 940490. Under here we find descriptions equidistant from the left margin that have no tariff numbers: pillows, cushions, and similar furnishings, and other. We have a quilt, not a pillow, so we go to other again. We are now going for the 8-digit subheading. Our first indent is 9404-9080 with the description of cotton not containing any embroidery. Definitely not ours, so we continue on to another other without a tariff number where we find 9404-9085 quilts, eiderdowns, comforters, and similar articles. This will be our 8-digit heading. Now we are faced with more than one provision that merits consideration. Rule 1 will not work. Rule 2 will not work, as these are not incomplete, unfinished, or a mixture. We are on to GRI 3. 3A is out because there is only one description and it's pretty specific: quilt. 3B is out as the quilt is not a mixture, composite, good, or set. 3C is where we hit pay dirt. Using Rule 3C pursuant to 6, we classify the quilt in 9404-90-8236, or the heading that occurs last in numerical order. Here is what we need to remember about this process. We use GRI 1 to 5 to select a 4-digit heading. After that, we use them over and over again to select a 6 and then an 8 and finally a 10-digit heading to describe our product. Sort of like the old instructions on a bottle of shampoo: lather, rinse, repeat. Here in living color is how the HTS is laid out. First and foremost, we have the 4-digit headings. They are located at the leftmost margin and contain all the items and only those items indented underneath it, starting with the 6 and then the 8 and finally, not shown, the 10-digit headings. Once we have selected, according to Rule 1 to 5, our 4-digit heading, we ignore any other 4-digit heading underneath our selection. Our next step is to select, according to Rule 1 to 5, pursuant to 6, a 6-digit heading that is under our 4-digit heading, ignoring any 6-digit heading falling outside our 4-digit heading. Then again, we make a selection of an 8-digit heading from those and only those that are under our selected 6-digit heading, doing our ignoring bit. To summarize, we select a 4-digit heading. Under that 4-digit, we select a 6-digit. Then under our selected 6-digit heading, we choose an 8-digit heading, and then on to 10 if necessary. Never ever compare a 6, 8, or 10-digit heading to one that is outside your selected heading. You can be led down the garden path. Remember the anorak. Now we want to look at the additional U.S. rules. The ones we have just discussed, 1 to 6, are international. Everybody uses them. The United States has added 4 more just to make your life a bit harder. These rules apply only to goods entering the United States. Now for the good news, there really is only one rule. The bad news is that there are 4 parts to the rule. Let's start right in with 1A. This rule states that when you import something, you have to name it for what the principal use is. Let's say that you have a very drafty factory. You have found that you can only hold the doors open with a 12-pound sledgehammer. You go to a vendor in China and purchase 24 of them for your doors. When you import them, can you call them doorstops? No, you can't, and that's because of additional Rule 1A, which states that you have to call it what it is its principal use, a sledgehammer. What you do with it after importation is not important, only what the principal use is in the United States. In 1B, we are talking about actual use. There are items in the tariff that are indicated for use in or to be installed in tractors suitable for agricultural use. In this case, the imported article must be installed in the tractors and proof must be provided to customers within 3 years. The next one, 1C, we have talked about before. What this states is that if a part is only used in a particular machine, then that part can be classified as parts of that machine. On the other hand, if the part has its own provision in the tariff book, then that provision must be used. If I am importing engines for motorcycles, I cannot call them parts of motorcycles. I have to place them in their own provision as an engine. Now the last one gets a little tricky. Remember back when we were talking about Rule 3 and we said that articles of base metal and textiles will be classified by the metal or fabric that predominates by weight. Remember that? Well, the part about metal comes from Section 15, Note 5, and would apply to a metal article anywhere in the tariff book and is not limited to Section 15. Textiles, on the other hand, are not. A note in Section 11, Note 2, and Subheading Note 2 states that the weight of the fabric predominates when deciding the classification. However, these notes are limited to Section 11. Rule 1D takes care of that by extending it to any provision in which textiles are named, for example, headgear. We now know all about the 6 general rules of interpretation and the additional 4 that were thrown at us. We have to memorize these rules and their concepts and be able to apply them. The next session will cover how to handle classification questions on the exam. Remember that there are many classification questions and analysis of the answers in your workbook under the HTS Questions tab and on the practice test in the Student's Corner. See you at the bottom.